Welcome back to the Former Fat Friend podcast. I am here with Sara, who is FatGirlTalking on Instagram, and I am so excited to hear about Sara's story today. Sara had gastric bypass surgery almost 3 years ago. She has lost over 200 pounds, which is just mind-bogglingly incredible. And she has recently shared about how she's added a GLP-1 into her journey. And I'm just so excited to get to know her, for you to learn about her story. She's also one of my favorite people to follow on Instagram. She is hilarious and so funny. So if you're not following her, go do that right now and then come back. She is just the best. So Sara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kasey. I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I started following you very early on in my journey. We had surgery around the same time. You were in December. I think I was in November, maybe like 2 weeks apart. And I found you and was like, when you're kind of newly post-op, you're trying to find people who are in a similar stage as you. So that's when I started following you, and then just absolutely loved connecting with you. Like I said, I love your sense of humor, and I love the humor that you brought to this journey too, which can be such a heavy journey. And I think having that little bit of levity was just a really important thing for me. And so we've connected over the past 3 years, and I'm excited to share a little bit more of your story with our listeners. So can you just kind of give us a little bit of your background, who you are and how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that thinking about mutual admiration here, I started following you, Kasey, though, because we met when we were in the Guacra dietitians, her class, right? And right. We were in the same group of people who were, I don't know, what do we call that? Like your session that we were doing, like sort of in that
cohort. Yeah.
Yeah. We were cohorts there. And I think that I loved listening to you because you had a story that was different than mine. And for me, the humor part comes in because this can be really heavy. This can be something like, there was a pun. Sorry about that. This can be a really heavy subject. It's something that I always think the heaviest piece of obesity is really all this shame that we carry around. Yeah. And shame doesn't give a lot of room for joy and for levity. And I just wanted that to not be true. I wanted to talk about sort of my life and the fullness of my life and this thing that was really omnipresent in it. And I wanted to do it with enough humor that was at least authentic, but that also might encourage other people to laugh a little bit, because I couldn't live under that blanket of shame anymore. So,
yeah.
So I had surgery almost 3 years ago at the ripe age of 50 years old. And wow. It was a really long time coming for me. I have been overweight the vast majority of my life. There are pictures of me in albums, probably right before I was in kindergarten. They're just this very normal little slip of a girl. And who really didn't show any signs of being anything other than just sort of very average size. And then you start to look at my school pictures, and in first grade, there's a really marked difference between that little girl who was in kindergarten and who was in first grade. And I really started to gain weight around then. And I wish that I could tell you that there was some sort of big precipitating event, or or that there was a trauma or something I could trace it all back to, and there just isn't. I've looked through every bit of every corner in my mind, and there just wasn't anything from a sort of good story perspective that led to that weight gain. And then from then on, obesity was just a part of who I was. And not only was it a part of who I was, but it was the most visible thing about me when you looked at me and everyone around me. And it was something that no one ever talked about in any terms other than concern or in a way that wanted to solve the problem of what I was. It wasn't just a thing about me. It was a problem that needed to be solved. And so I spent the vast majority of my life just as the fat kid. And that is not the easiest way to live. No. I think that when it's just who you are and it's your reality every day, you're not always really tuned in to the way that it's looked at by everyone else until that sort of moment in your life where you are tuned in because it becomes the one thing that people feel very free to comment to you about. And so it's just something that's been with me my whole life. And, as a child of the 70s and the 80s, there were not ways to manage obesity that were not absolutely focused on all the things that you are doing wrong every day. And so I think that I went on my first diet when I was about 10. That was the first time I was taken to Weight Watchers. With my mom, my family, I don't come from a family who has a weight problem particularly. My mom always carried some extra weight and still does, but never to the extent that I did. Right. So she was always trying to help me to manage the same issue that she had, even though mine started a lot earlier and became a lot more extreme than hers did.
Yeah.
So it's something I worked my whole life to mitigate.
Yeah.
And I had not really considered having surgery probably till I was in my 40s.
Okay.
I think every woman. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Did you know that bariatric surgery existed, that it was an option, or what?
Yes
what
and
made...
no. Right.
Okay.
Like my mom had told me, I think it was in my 20s when one of her friends had bariatric surgery. And again, this would have been 30 years ago. Right. And it was not something that was common. It was called stomach stapling at the time. And she said, she got her stomach stapled. Does this sound horrible?
Yeah.
And so she had her stomach stapled, and it was really, it was a really extreme thing that someone would do. And then I remember her telling me one time that she knew someone who had their jaw wired shut.
What?
Yeah. Like, so that you just couldn't eat, right? So that was the way that they handled the intake piece of it, was like wiring the jaw shut to stop you from eating. And I think my mom never was like, you should do that. It's just that, these things came up naturally because we were always talking about my weight. It was always in play.
Yeah.
So I didn't even know that bariatric surgery was an option. When I did know it was an option, I knew maybe tangentially a few people who had it, but it was very, very risky. We were always told it's a very, very high mortality rate. And it's really, really only for the people who aren't strong enough to lose the weight naturally.
Yeah.
And my favorite phrase.
Naturally.
Naturally, right? And so it didn't ever seem like it was something that would be an option for me. So I didn't ever look into that. And I think that it was, well into maybe my 40s. I think every woman has one pivotal birthday where they just go, oh no, now I'm old. And interestingly, that wasn't 40 for me. That was 30. 30 hit me out of nowhere. Like 30, I woke up and I was like, oh my God, I'm 30. What does 30 look like? Am I supposed to be, is that this how 30 is supposed to be? And it was a really, really tough year. But the good news about that is that every other birthday, I didn't give a crap. Like 40, I was like, okay, bring it on. Like, and as 50 got around, I'm like, it can't be worse than 30. And so I think in my 40s, I really started, this is when sort of that, the obesitainment sort of shows started up, like My 600-Pound Life.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Any of the shows like on TLC that were about people who were, struggling with obesity, or people, who might be candidates for surgery. I think that started to kind of get into the zeitgeist. And so I started thinking oh, that might be the solution for me.
Yeah.
And then I came really close to in my 40s thinking oh, I think I might want to explore that. And then my insurance said, oh, no, we don't cover that. We don't cover anything related.
At all?
No.
Wow.
Nothing. Yeah. And they just didn't cover it. So for me, it just became this idea of well, that would be nice if maybe I could do that. My insurance doesn't cover it. So I spent 30 years just, joining Weight Watchers at least once a year, trying different fad diets, joining different gyms, working on different ways to manage this thing that I knew was wrong with me.
Yeah. I'm curious, did you ever have any doctor talk to you about treatment for weight loss or obesity that wasn't just diet and exercise?
No, it was all suck it up. And it was in diet and exercise, they have their place.
Of course, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
It's not that it's junk science. It was just, I think that when I would go to the doctor, I would kind of get that all right, well, okay, we're going to have to talk about your weight again. You're like, I know, it's okay. Yeah. Like, you're right. It's really bad. What should I do? Like, have you considered like a Weight Watchers? I'd be like, what? What
Yeah.
is that? It's like,
Never thought of it.
and they would still say, well, Weight Watchers is still the best thing you could do. I tried all sorts of things. Mom and I went to a place called Diet Center. I tried Jenny Craig. They would always talk about kind of that next fad thing. Nobody ever approached me in all those years and said, hey, maybe surgery is the right thing for you to do. I just don't think it was part of I don't think it was part of the medical lexicon for dealing with obesity for a long
Yeah.
time.
Did you ever have any successful weight loss attempts on any of those diets?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I lost a great deal of weight a couple of times. Lost 100 pounds once, which was
Oh, wow.
amazing.
Okay.
I lost 75 pounds another time. I am a giantess, so I'm almost 5'11", and I've always carried a great deal of weight on me. I think that what those attempts taught me is that I could lose some weight, but in my life I had never sort of passed that threshold when you lose weight where you go, oh, this is what it's like when you lose weight, right? Like I never got to a weight that still wasn't completely unacceptable. And
Yeah.
so it was almost like I could have some success, but the level of success that I really wanted and needed to materially change everything about my life was just always out of reach. And then that finish line and sort of like that got set longer and longer the older I got, and sort of the more I would yo-yo, lose some, gain back twice as much, right? So it just always seemed out of reach to me.
Yeah, I'm curious now that you are kind of on the other side of bariatric surgery. If you look back on those weight loss attempts and the kind of losing weight and regaining, can you pinpoint why you think those failed? I ask this as someone who could never lose weight. I didn't have any of those yo-yos. I never lost weight. I just went up and up and up and up until I had surgery. So I'm just curious, like comparing those to your experience with bariatric surgery, can you kind of like pinpoint where the difference is?
Yeah, I actually can, but it's more philosophical than anything. I think that for me, I saw this concept of being at whatever a goal weight means. The idea of losing weight is this very finite experience. It's something that I needed to do and I needed to get through so that the life that I had been denied or denying myself all this time could finally begin. And that concept of there's a finish line out there and I just have to get to it. And for me, those attempts were very successful because I could sort of channel all of this freakish focus that I could for a short time, pour into the behaviors and, following the rules and making sure I wrote everything down and doing everything that the diet said I needed to do. I could do that for a very short period of time, but it wasn't sustainable long term. And I think that I could get to a point where I started to feel better. And then I would think, oh, I'm cured. Great. Like I figured this out. Right. So I'll just keep doing this thing I'm doing. And then the weight will just keep coming off and everything will be better. And I won't have to spend all of my time and my energy on this thing anymore. There was mostly hubris. This is essentially what I'm saying. Like it was just this idea that it would be over someday. And
Yeah.
it just never was.
Yeah. And so with having bariatric surgery, do you think that that's given you, has it changed your mindset of like, this is more of a lifelong journey? Or do you think it's given you a little bit more freedom to have more of that, I think what you're describing as balance that we all are looking for?
I think it's absolutely done both. Like when I had to think about sort of the investment in bariatric surgery, like I'm a researcher and I'm a delver and I want to know everything about it. And I also didn't have insurance that would cover it at the time. And so I knew I was going to have to write a really big check, to get this done. And there's privilege in that. I get it. But if I was going to do this, if I was going to permanently alter my body, then I had to get over the concept that I ever got to be done with this, right? That it was ever going to be over. And so I really tried to embrace this idea of like, there's today. Today is what I have. And there isn't a finish line out there in the distance that if I get to that, then the rest of my life begins. I'm going to have to look at my life at every step along the way and say, what can I do with this day? Like what can be better? And for me, the part I kind of left out is that this became in a lot of ways a very life-saving thing for me, and not just a physical life-saving from the comorbidities and the things that carrying hundreds of extra pounds were giving me, but in the ability to go out and to live a life.
Mm.
You know, as my weight spiraled out of control, you know, and over those couple of years prior to surgery, especially, if I would lose weight, I would gain it all back, I would add more on. My world just got so small because I truly was very limited in my movement. I have the best dad in the whole world, and I got so many wonderful traits from him, but I could have done without the arthritis. And when arthritis kind of came for me, it really very much limited what I could do physically in the world. And it didn't help that I couldn't do those things now. And I was also, encumbered by all the extra weight that I was carrying, which was exacerbating the arthritis. And so when my knees went, and that happened about a decade ago, my world shrunk to a very, very small, path. And so for me, it was about losing the weight. But if I wanted to be out in the world, I wanted to do the things that I felt that I wasn't done doing, at 50 years old, I was going to have to do it in a body that could get some new knees and get out there in the world. So for me, that was my motivation, was that the world is wide and I have not seen enough of it. And I don't want this to be the end for me. Mm-hmm. And that sounds very doom and gloom, but for me, it was very freeing.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question, eventually I get there, that the surgery was a drastic move for me, but it was also a stepping stone to some other things. It was being able to get a couple of new knees. It was being able to see what my place and what was out there in the world that I couldn't do before that maybe I could do now. And that freedom that I gained from that is worth every bit of the angst I sometimes have that I never get to stop doing this. I never, ever get to stop thinking. Will never get to a place in my life where I go, oh, look, I just eat totally like a normal person who has no food issues. Like that balance for me came with the restrictions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's so powerful. And, this is something I've experienced too, which is that I knew life was harder in a bigger body. I don't think I realized even all the ways that it was until that weight was gone. And I know we've talked about this. We had two very different journeys. So I wasn't at a weight where I was experiencing like physical pain or arthritis and, inability to get a knee replacement surgery because of my weight, but it still affected my like day-to-day life, my desires to go out and do things with friends. And like, I just even think about the mental energy it took to get dressed and find clothes that I felt comfortable in, and to be, out with friends, but constantly monitoring like, oh, what roll is showing when I'm sitting, and do I have a pillow to cover my stomach? And, all of those things really do. I like the way you say that. They make your world so small, and it's amazing how big the world is. And so I think that's incredible that you had the kind of ability to step back and say, like, I don't want my world to be this small, and I need to do something to open that up for myself again.
Yeah. And I think I look at you and I think, God, I wish 20 years ago that I had been going through the same things that you were. Like, where my weight wasn't affecting me from a physical perspective, particularly. Still got to do the things I wanted to and go the places that I wanted to go. But it took up every bit of my mental energy, wondering how I would be perceived, like what would fit, how would I feel when I was there, how far away was the event, all of those things that we spend so much time thinking about. And then I could never figure out how not to care about other people's perceptions of me.
Yeah.
and I still can't in a lot of ways.
Yeah. That's hard.
That was really tough for me. And I think that we probably all have a legal pad of moments in our lives, a list of these indignities and sort of judgments that people put on you. And I in my terrible moments, I can still go back and I can think of every one of them. And I wonder to myself, to your point, if I had lived in a different time and if I had lived in a different set of opportunities, like what would my life have been like? What would have been different if I could have done this 20 years prior to when I did. Now,
Mm-hmm.
not a super big fan of regret. It's just like just deciding to feel bad about things. And I don't have a ton of time for that anymore. But I love that I get to follow and look at the journeys of people like you and younger people who are doing this at a different stage in your life. You didn't have to wait for any of the really, really detrimental, physical effects to really do something amazing for yourself. And I think there's room for every story. I
Yeah.
think that it's a big lie that every obese person has a same essential story. I just don't think it's true. I think there's a lot of commonalities,
Mm-hmm.
but I think we are as different as we are alike. So
Absolutely.
I try
Yeah.
not
And
to dwell on it too much.
that's one thing I've always appreciated about you is that you are very much like there's room for everyone in this community. And I think sometimes, as open and wonderful as the bariatric community is, sometimes there is this like attitude of like, oh, you weren't big enough to have bariatric surgery. Your BMI wasn't high enough. And I was like, well, I was obese and like medically I was big enough. And I can appreciate that. Like, I'll never know the experience of someone who is 500-600 pounds. I will never know that, but it doesn't mean that like my experience is invalid because I didn't get to
Absolutely.
experience that, larger body experience that someone else had. And you've always been so kind and wonderful and supportive in that. And I appreciate that so much about you, that like there is a room for every single voice in this community.
There super is. Like, why would we be at each other's throats? Like, y'all, there's enough judgment out there. Can we see like where we intersect? Because it's really funny. I'll share with you, like, you're kind of a barometer for me, because one of the things that I loved about meeting you and following you is I was like, well, Kasey started this journey at kind of where I'd like to be at some point. and 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 that is not a bad thing, right? Like that is to me, it was really instructive that I used to be you like a million years ago, when I had 100 pounds to lose. And what might my life have been like if I had been able to lose that 100 pounds? And I know the weight of 100 pounds. It's not unique. Like, we all know that whatever weight we're carrying is stopping us from doing things that we want to do. So I don't have a lot of tolerance for that. When people pull out, they're like, well, she's, she didn't really lose that much weight. I'm like, girl, like, why do you need that to feel better? Why wouldn't we
Yeah.
just look at each other and go, oh my gosh, good job. You look amazing. I'm so glad you're happy. And the line I pull out all the time is, years and years ago, someone told me their definition of success, and their definition of success was having choices.
Mm.
And I realized one day that I just wanted more choices. And anything that any of us does at any point in this journey that increases the choices that we have in the world is a-okay with me. That is exactly
Yeah.
what we should be doing.
I
And so,
love
yeah,
that.
there's room for everybody. And Sarah doesn't play that. You send him to me. I'll go get him, girl. And
I
I wish
appreciate
that we
that.
could have a little bit more compassion for each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So you're 50 years old. Your
Mm-hmm.
insurance still doesn't cover bariatric
Nope.
surgery. You make the decision, you're going to pay out of pocket.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like in those early post-op days?
It was hard. Like, it was
Yeah.
really hard.
Yeah.
I joked, like, I think so. I decided to have the surgery. I knew it was going to be a big financial outlay. Like, I looked at all of the options. Like, I thought, well, I could go somewhere and do it. Well, but at 430 pounds, like, it was not an option for me to hop on a plane and go somewhere
Mhm.
and do that. That would have added more stress to my body.
Yeah.
I knew that I didn't want to I wanted to pick the surgery that was the right fit for me. I knew that there was a reason that I had, I knew that I had the money to do it. So, like, let's invest in myself. Let's do something that
Mhm.
I think is really going to, is really going to make a difference in my life. And then I started writing emails every week to my HR department saying, this is really stupid that you don't cover this. And I'm pretty mad about it.
Good for you.
I kept going to my boss, who is the chief financial officer. And I was saying, like, you know what, like, as you're watching me go through this, like, we need to pay for this. Good news is the next year they started paying for it.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, it was really cool. Like, I'm so excited about it. Like, I've gotten to watch people that I work with be able to have the surgery. I still do not have my $24,000 back. I would
Yeah.
kind of like that, but
Yeah.
it was really a moment of activism for me, right? So I was
Yeah.
like, we're going to do this. And I knew that having any surgery, when you are carrying extra weight is riskier. And I knew it was going to be tough, and it was tough. Like I had a really, really tough couple first weeks. My body was not, handling all the stress very well. It's an abdominal surgery, which is like the worst one you can have, right? And I had a lot of scar tissue from a prior surgery. And I remember about 3 or 4 days after I came home, I literally thought to myself, like, call my surgeon and tell her I made a mistake and just put it all back. Like, because this is not cool. I'm not enjoying this. And what we don't say out loud to each other sometimes is that right after you have bariatric surgery, you are going to literally be starving to death for a while. And you're going to have to figure out how to stay alive during those crucial weeks after surgery. And it's truly that. Like, that's the easiest way to say it. And so it was just, it played to my my sort of controlling nature, where I could really say, okay, today, these are the 10 things I need to do to stay alive. These are the things that I need to put into my body. These are the ways I need to be very rigid about this. This is how I need to follow up. So it was not a blissful, easy experience. I remember talking to someone who was like, oh yeah, I came home like the next day. I went and I walked, a half a mile. And I was like, well, I could not make it to the kitchen like after my surgery.
It's so interesting how people have such different experiences. Lisa has talked about how her experience was very similar to yours. She was in a lot of pain, really, really struggling. I went to a Mexican market the next day and got a massage.
See?
Like, what?
That's amazing. Like,
it's crazy.
I can't even imagine what that would have been like. Again, I think you can have wildly different experiences to fight the same thing. So it was tough, and it was, I won't lie. I did regret it for a little while just because it was so physically tough on me.
Mm-hmm.
But then, after I got through those first couple of weeks, it became a little bit like a game. What are the things that you need to do? How do you manage this intake? What's that going to look like?
Mm-hmm.
And then it was just, that, especially that first 6 or 8 months, you're just trying to hold on. Like, I was just trying to hold on for dear life. What are the changes that are happening to me? How do I incorporate a new food? What does my body think of that? So some of that sort of rigid the work that you have to put into that really helped me just to stay focused, right?
Yeah.
To try to, to move around and do. And I was also doing that with terrible knees that were bone on bone, that were awful, right? So I didn't even have the ability to really, do any exercise, right? So I had to just really make sure that all of the effort I was putting into it was paying off from a food perspective. Because I was really trying to get to that magic BMI so that I could get my worst knee replaced. So that was where I was headed.
There was a BMI cutoff to have that surgery.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I was talking to my orthopedist. This is before I had the weight loss surgery. And I said, what do I have to do to get new knees? He's like, you got to take off like 100 pounds minimum.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. And then he laughed because I came back and said, okay, well, I decided I'm going to have bariatric surgery. This is the time I'm going to do it. And then I will see you at my next appointment. And then we will kind of see where I go from there. And we'll get this knee scheduled. He was like, okay. And and then as I saw him next time, he was like, Sarah, like, he's like, you did it. I was like, I told you I was gonna, let's get this taken care of. And so he was kind of my biggest fan. He was like, yep, let's get you down to like, and when I weighed in that day, he was like, we are doing this, like, he's like, so let's get it scheduled and let's get that first knee out of there.
That is so awesome. I mean, that's so many life-changing things all together. I can't even imagine I would imagine that knee replacement surgery is incredibly tough.
Yeah, it's wild. Actually, it was not fun, but it was easier than the bariatric surgery in some ways.
Really?
Yeah. And I think it was easier than the bariatric surgery because I'd taken off 100 pounds by that point, or maybe a little bit more at the time. I think a little bit more when I had that first knee. And so I already felt better. And then I also knew that, okay, like if you want to get better from the surgery, you do every single thing that the PT tells you to do. You follow all the rules, you do all the things that you're supposed to do. And, and I'm competitive. So I was like, this is gonna be the best knee that was ever done. And so so I really worked really hard on that. And then I thought if I can get through this one, then we can get that other one done. And then like, who knows what will open up in the world for me if I can do that. But it was a major surgery a year for the last 3 years.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Christmas was rough for a couple of years.
Oh man. Yeah.
And yeah, it was a lot.
Okay, so you have bariatric surgery. You're
Mhm.
obviously you lost a lot of weight. Was there any point at which you were like, okay, like this is actually working. I'm actually doing it. This is different this
Yeah,
time.
for sure. And I think it was because you have that great mind gut connection that sort of gets severed for a while after your surgery.
Hmm.
I was really counting on that happening. And it did. I think like in that first 6 months,
Yeah.
absolute freedom that I wasn't spending every minute of every day wondering what that next meal was going to be. Now, I was still doing that in a way, but it was much more in a I need to stay alive. I need to figure out what I can eat next. What will I tolerate? Okay, how much should it be? How will that affect my body, right? Rather than,
Mhm.
man, I really want some chicken nuggets. Like it was, it took
Yeah.
a lot of that out of the mix for me for quite,
Yeah.
like that was
It's
amazing.
it's so interesting to me. This was such a novelty, a post-surgery experience, which was that I can have food in my house and completely forget that it's there. And it's like food that I love. It happened to me just a
Yes.
couple days ago where Bill's parents brought these really good sourdough pretzels down for us from
Mhm.
like this little, like
Mhm.
orchard thing that they go to. Anyway, we have like weird kitchen storage. And so our pantry, we don't really have a pantry. It's like above the fridge. I never look in there. And someone had put them up there. And the other day I went to go put something away and I was like, oh my God, we have these pretzels. I love these pretzels. And of course I ate one because I saw them. But like that would have never happened before. Like my
Mhm.
brain was so filled with thoughts of food. I knew every single thing that I had in my house. I knew where
Mhm.
it was, how much was left, and then I would think about all the other foods that I didn't have that I wanted and I could order and where could I get it from? And it was just it's such a bizarre thing to try to like explain that to someone of like my brain feels like free of that
Mhm.
constant focus on food and it's just yeah, that was one of the coolest things for me
It's
too. Of
amazing. Like it is. I wish that all of the people in the world who are so convinced that obesity is just this character flaw, like it's like if you guys could just get your shit together. Oh, can I say that?
yeah, you
If
can
you
say
could
that.
just, if you could just get your act together, like you would not be this way. If they could live just one day in a brain that just never ever stops thinking ever, and then
Yeah.
add food as part of that to the mix. Like it was just always a part of me. I remember being a little girl and I was probably 5 or 6 and I remember watching TV and thinking like it was a Burger King commercial. That's how long ago this was. And I remember thinking like wouldn't it be cool if like I could stop the TV and like reach in and like get that burger. Like that
Yeah.
was me like at 5 and 6, right? Like it was always a part of me is what is the next thing I want to eat? What could I get? How good will it taste? How many could I have? How can I make sure no one knows I'm eating it? It would just took up so much of my brain space.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I've gotten into debates in comments of videos with people saying, like, well, like thin people work just as hard to stay thin. And I think that's bullshit.
Yes.
Someone who has been obese and is now not obese, I do not work as hard to stay the size that I am now as I worked so much harder when I was 240 pounds to
Mhm.
just not gain weight. Like, I don't think people really understand the struggle. And I think if they did, they would have so much more empathy for people who do struggle with their weight. I don't think anyone, if you're right, if you live one day in the brain of an obese person, you would not think that it's a lack of willpower or a choice, or you just can't stop shoving food in your face. And, it's a character flaw. It is so much, so much bigger and deeper than that.
And you don't have to. Part of empathy is understanding that your pain can exist while other people's does too. Like,
Yes.
right? Like
Yeah.
I don't have to like we don't have to play the relativity game. Right? Like it is okay to say, hey, as someone who is obese, you have different things that you have to think about. Like it's
Mhm.
not the same as the things that I think about. I still have to think about things. And I always think, yeah, I I have talked to people who don't struggle with obesity, but struggle with their weight in the ways that are very meaningful to them, right?
Mhm.
Like that there is a weight they want to be at, there's extra weight they're carrying. And I hear people say to me all the time, like you said that thing about how you think about food, and that's how I think about food. And I think to myself, cool. Like, I'm really glad for you because you could think that way about food. We could feel the same way about it. but your body does not have the same set of genes and experiences to allow you to get to a weight that I did. You're not one bad choice away from being me. We can be two separate people with two separate makeups, and I can still have compassion for the struggle that you're going through. I would like you to extend that to me as well. And I think empathy is a learned trait, and some people are very bad at it, and they cannot comprehend that there's an experience outside of their own. So they're always trying to compare it to what they have. And like, oh yeah, that's just like how I feel. And I just don't, I'm not convinced that that's true.
Yeah. Well, and
it can be tiresome.
I think a lot of that argument too, from a lot of it on social media, not in my real life, because people in my real life, I don't keep people around who are awful. So it's only on the internet that this happens. But I think for a lot of people on the internet, it's like these, you know, sometimes it'll be like coaches or people who are, you know, naturally thin, but they're like, look how hard I work. I work out every day. I eat healthy. If you just did what I did, you would be like me. And it's like, no, I wouldn't. I absolutely wouldn't. And if you did what I do, you also wouldn't be like me. Like, so I think that's where a lot of that comes in. It's like, oh, well, I work hard. You just have to work hard too, and you wouldn't be fat.
Yeah. And it is. And it's a message I've gotten my whole life. Right. And I bought into it for a really long time because I just knew from earliest days of my life that there was something wrong with me. I was not able to do a set of things that would have put me in an acceptable body. Yeah. And no one said to me, well, it's probably not just the things that you are not doing. Like, it's probably a little bit bigger than that, because nobody got that. Right. And as medical science pushes forward, like, we're starting to break down some of those walls, you know, and I always thought about it like, you know, people look at a woman who weighs 70 pounds and they think she is starving herself to death. Like, she is sick. She needs help. We need resources. We need to understand mentally where she's at. We have to talk about the science that, you know, that allows people to sort of not eat themselves, you know, into a dangerous place. I mean, anorexia it's a horrible thing. Eating disorders are really, really difficult to overcome. And that is something we need to invest in. And then they look at a woman who is 370 pounds. They're like, maybe you should get on the treadmill and stop eating so much pie. Yeah. And that is where the conversation ends. And it's hopeful to me that it is starting to turn.
Yeah, that's powerful. I've actually never really thought about that kind of analogy, but you're right. I mean, we have treatment and, you know, inpatient programs for people who have very severe cases of anorexia. We don't have anything like that for obesity.
Yeah. And if there is something like that, it is that it is reserved for cases that are so very severe that we don't have all this interim work that we do about self-worth and the science of it and understanding how we can, you know, reframe our minds. It's really just more about, like, you know, once you get a little exercise and maybe don't eat all of the Doritos. And it is something that it still boggles my mind that is still where we are in a lot of places. And I have to believe that talking about it and saying out loud that that's not the experience, it has to help. I also believe that that talking about having surgery or talking about your experiences as an obese person is an intensely personal decision. And I just got very tired of not talking. That's what my handle is on Instagram. It's FatGirlTalking, because I'm so tired of the most visible thing about me being the thing that nobody talked about. And you know, I laugh and I tell people that my whole life has been this dichotomy, and I call it the fat butt, right? Like, I'm fat, but I'm smart. I'm fat, but I'm accomplished. I'm fat, but I'm also really funny. But, you know, like, it was, I'm mitigating like everything that this body is wrong with this body, but all these other things that I am. And it's exhausting. And I wish that we didn't have to do that all the time. So I talk about it. Yeah. That's what I do. I will talk to anybody about it.
That's amazing. And it is powerful. It's actually, ironically, something I struggled with I was able to share with strangers on the internet, but really struggled to share with like people in my real life. And I joked, and I think one of our first episodes, like I would cut sizes out of clothing because I was so afraid that someone would see the size. And it's like, well, they have eyes. Like, they know what they they can look at you, they can know what you look like. But it was like, I had so much shame around the size of my body that I didn't want to talk about it either. But I think talking about it is the only way that we affect change. And so it's something I'm very passionate now about on my platform, is like really this message that like obesity is a disease. It is not a decision. It is not a moral failing. It's not a character flaw or a personal shortcoming. And if you need help, it's okay to ask for help. I think if I can do anything good in the world, I hope it's to share that message. You know, I think it's so powerful. So I love that you are so passionate about talking about it, because we need to.
So my question for you is, when did that fear go away for you to start talking about it? Was it because you got to a weight that you felt was acceptable, or how did you go from, I don't want to talk about this to anybody, to like, I'm just going to talk about it with the whole internet?
So I found the Instagram community when I was in my pre-op phase. And it was super important for me because I didn't tell anybody that I was having surgery. I didn't even tell my family that I was having surgery. I didn't know anyone who had had weight loss surgery. So I really needed that as a community. I needed people to like rally around me, and I needed information, and I needed support. And it felt small and intimate because it was for a long time. And I went to great lengths to like keep people from my real life from ever finding that account. I like blocked everybody that I could find, and preemptively blocked people that I didn't even like know that well. It was like a friend of a friend of a friend. And so I tried really hard to like keep that quiet. And then somehow I posted a video once, and it like just took off and got like 1 million views. And I had this like influx of followers, and I was like, oh boy, what do I do here? And I think it was just slowly over time, it was connecting with people saying like, thank you for sharing this. Like, especially the people who said, I didn't know that this was an option for someone my size, who were the kind of the 240, 250 BMI around 40, like someone like me. I had the same experience where I didn't know it was an option until somebody shared. And I was like, okay, maybe I can like, you know, do something good with this. But I still didn't tell people in my real life. It still felt so separate. And I don't think I got more comfortable with sharing it with people in my real life, even when I got to an acceptable weight. And I thought I would, right? Like I thought initially I said, oh, I'm not going to tell anybody I'm having weight loss surgery, because like if it doesn't work, then that'd be really embarrassing. And I don't want to have to like be like, oh yeah, I failed. But then I didn't fail, and I still didn't want to tell people. I think I just had a lot of shame around the fact that I had gotten big enough to need weight loss surgery. I actually think my boyfriend is probably a huge reason why I've gotten a lot more comfortable sharing more with people who I know in real life. Telling him was terrifying, and he was just so supportive. And he was like, you know, this is like part of your life. It's part of who you are. It's part of what makes you who you are today. And you don't have anything to be ashamed about. And so that over the last 1.5 years since we've been together, I think I've become much more open with people in my real life. But it's still something it's so silly to be like, I share with, 100,000 people on the internet, but I still don't like to talk about it with people that I actually know.
I do think that it's really personal though, because I do think there's so much attached to it, right? There's so much judgment, and and you said it yourself, you're like, I didn't want to like admit that I got to the place where I had to have it. Again, that's you, like you're judging yourself for it, right? Like
yeah.
And we all do it, and it's funny because I started talking about it and I thought like, boy, this is something I want to do because I'm loudmouth anyway. And I'm just going to start talking about it. I'm just going to say it out loud. We're going to figure it out together. We're going to watch it go. And at every step along the way, like this pride in like how I was changing my life and what I was doing was like really, really exciting to me. But then I think there's always this joy of like the before and the after, right? Because if I think of like a like poster child, for success, I think of Kasey, right? Like Kasey was like, I was this weight and I was not as happy, and I'm this weight and I look like $1 million. I'm doing everything I want to do. And I knew that it was going to look a little different for me, right? Like I was going to lose 100 pounds and still be real fat. And I was still going to have to take off the next 100 pounds like I've done and still go technically still fat and have to understand like where what that meant for me, right? Like what was enough going to be, what was not everybody has to go like from, so it's like unacceptable to acceptable. Like we can like figure out what acceptable is. And so I had to keep telling myself all along the way. I kept going, I would say to myself, I would look at it at a weight that I felt good at. And I would say, okay, if I never lost another pound, would this be okay? And the answer was like, well, I guess, but it was never a yes. It was like, I'm not quite where I want to be yet. And I'm just hitting in this territory where I'm like, this might be okay. Like I might be all right. Like I still have some goals, but like, I don't ever see myself, being a size 4, but I do think more and more like, oh, I feel like this is the right place. And then I look back at pictures of myself at every step along the way and I go, oh my goodness. Like I get judgy of myself. Like I think like I felt so good at that weight, but I look so different now. And I have to extend myself this compassion that I just never did at the time before surgery. I never talked to myself and said, you know what, who you are right now is actually fine.
Yeah.
But if you want to make some decisions to have a different life, that's okay too. And so I want to tell people who are thinking about having the surgery or in the middle of surgery, I just want to say that to them. It's like, you're fine. You're just fine. You just get to decide where you want to be next, because there's nothing more insufferable than someone who has had the surgery and, gets a little success under their belt and then forgets that belt used to be real tight.
Yeah.
And who doesn't extend that compassion to the people who are at every other stage in the game. And I love that you do that. It's one of my very favorite things. You never go, well, I did this because I'm pretty great. and like, I'm pretty awesome. I did this. Is how everybody should do it. You really give some credence and some honor to the you that did this. That takes a lot of compassion to look at ourselves. And I very much appreciate that about how you acknowledge where you've been rather than just, pretending that, that person was the saddest person in the whole world who never had anything good in her life. And now look at me now, like now everything's perfect, right? Like you can say that these are two different versions of me and they both had value.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that self-compassion has grown so much. So maintenance is funny, right? Like you get to this place where you're like, for the first time in my entire life, I'm not trying to lose weight anymore. And that blows your mind because I've spent 38 years trying to lose weight.
That is nuts.
I know, it's crazy. But I had similar experiences where along the way, I would look back and be like, wow, I still look really fat at that time when at the time I thought I looked really good.
Look at me.
Yeah. But that actually has shifted for me, I think, a lot in the last year or so, where I can look back at the entirety of my journey and I like love the person that I see in every single stage of it. I don't have any negative thoughts about that version of myself. And I don't know where that came from other than just like time and space and reflection. And
but I think that's exactly where it came from, right?
Yeah.
Because I do like I sort of mourn for the pictures I don't have in my life because I didn't want to take the picture or I didn't want to be part of the photo. I didn't want to see that me, but I can look at pictures of myself like before and I can remember, oh God, I loved that outfit. Like I felt really cute that day. And I don't go, ooh, I felt really cute, but I wasn't. I go, no, I looked really cute that day. I loved how I felt in that, or I loved what that day was like, or I loved that version of me was proud of herself for where she was. And I extend this grace that I feel like I extend very easily to like externally to people. I extend that to myself better than I ever have. I still have my moments, not perfect at it. I still can be pretty hard on myself for things that, have come before, but I think that's what I've lost is that criticality of myself along with some of the weight. And that feels like a big burden to give up. And I hope I don't get that back.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think I've had a similar experience of, actually like liking myself for the first time in my life, which feels so nice. And I think sometimes, especially with social media, all you see is the physical, right? Like you post the before and after, and that's cool and exciting and it's great. But I would trade the looks part of this for everything else that has come with it in a heartbeat. Like you wouldn't even have to, it was not even a question. Like the freedom and the mental space and the confidence and the self-compassion, all of that matters so much more than what you actually look like. And I hope that people know that when they go into this journey. I hope that they can see that like it's not just about the before and after, it's about everything else.
Yeah, I love that. I think that when you're in the throes of it, which I think we probably will be forever. I don't know. We've only been doing this a couple of years. Talk to us
Yeah.
in a few more. I think that your perspective changes, right? You go from like this during, like I'm not in maintenance yet, but like my thoughts and the time I spend thinking about it's very different now than it was 200 pounds ago. Right now it's a little bit more about like, oh, kind of where do I want to be versus, oh my God, I can't be this anymore. Right. You know, and
Yeah.
you one time in Guac's class when we were sharing something, like you said this thing that was super, super pivotal and I've never forgotten it. And I think about it at least once a week. It's kind of my Roman Empire. Like you said that you were starting a new job and you said, I'm going to start this job and I'm going to meet people who never knew what I looked like 100 pounds
Yeah.
ago. And I had never in my whole life thought to myself, I'm going to meet people who never knew me at 430 pounds. I'm going to have new experiences and new, new interactions where it's not going to be about my size or how much smaller my size is. And how must that feel? Because at the time I was not there yet, right? Like I wasn't meeting anybody who was appreciably seeing, this weight loss.
Right.
And just recently in my life, like that has started to happen. Like I'm meeting new people. I'll meet new people at work. I'll meet new people out in the world. And it will occur to me, they have no idea that the person talking to them right now is not the person that they would have seen 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And it plays with my mind a little bit. And it makes me very aware of the things they're saying about people who are larger than me. It makes me very aware of the things they say about themselves and their bodies and the things they would like to change. And occasionally I have an in or the inkling to say, hey, just fun fact about that thing you're saying. But I find more often than not lately, it just doesn't come up. Yeah. And I did not know there would be a time in my life where my weight would not be the sole focus of every single thought and conversation that I essentially was having, whether internal or external.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I think that's the best thing. And you're right. Sometimes it's not good when people don't know that you used to be much heavier because they'll say things that are wildly offensive. And you're like, I'm still offended by that. Even if I don't look like the kind of person you think would be offended by that, I am.
Yeah.
But I think more often than not, it's the fact that you can exist without anyone even talking about, looking at, thinking about what you look like is incredible. It's
like you're not invisible anymore, but you kind of are, right? Like I feel more visible than I've ever felt, but I also feel like I don't have to wade through the judgment in every interaction. Like I used to say, like, I have to spend the first 10 minutes talking to somebody, especially in a professional capacity, convincing that I'm not an idiot. Like I just felt like I had to every time go, all right, not a moron, know some things, like good at what I do. It's why I'm here. And I just always felt like I had to get over that hump. And now I don't have to do that the way that I used to. And mixed feelings about it sometimes, but mostly it's just so refreshing to not have to fight up that hill.
It is refreshing. And it's also makes me really sad that that's the society that we live in. Cause I have had the same experience. Obviously I'm like a, working professional as well. And I feel like I have to try a lot less hard to convince people that I'm actually smart. And I'm not any smarter than I was 3 years ago. In fact, probably less smart.
Arguably. Probably less smart.
Yeah. Okay, so I do want to switch gears. I know we're almost at an hour, but I want to switch gears and talk about your decision to onboard a GLP-1 as part of your treatment. So kind of walk me through how that came up.
Yeah. So I was about 2.5 years post-surgery and I just hit a stall. I hit it for a long time. And I knew that all of those great post-surgical side effects were going to go away at some point, right? Like I knew that the food noise was going to come back. I knew that there were going to be, some different maybe tools I need to add into the arsenal. And I actually hadn't really thought about the injectables all that much, but I have not lost any weight for months. I stayed about the same. Like I did, I think at the end of the day, I think I gained back about 7 pounds from like my lowest. And it was kind of creeping up, like that 7 pounds was, but I wasn't really eating appreciably differently, I think, right? Like it probably was not tracking to the same level I was before, but I was eating kind of an appropriate amount of food for my body. I also had discovered that all of a sudden I could be mobile again because I had these 2 brand new knees. I was going to go out and use them. And so, I was walking every day. And I just think that I got to a point where I thought, this can't be where I sit for the rest of my life. I was having that conversation with myself, like, well, if I never lose another pound, like, do I want to be right here? And so I went to my doctor and he said, hey, I'm thinking about this. Like, can I go ahead and get on one of these? He was like, oh yeah, okay. Like I thought I was going to have to like prepare for a fight for it.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, oh, but you had your surgery. And I'm like, and he was like, no, he's like, these are great drugs. He's like, if you want to try one, he's like, no, probably not covered by your insurance. So we had to have that talk again.
Yeah.
And, now I'm writing letters about that to my HR department. But if you want to try it, let's give it a shot. And I would tell you that the first week I went, oh, I think there was food noise. I just didn't know it. Like I didn't know that it was back. And so it sort of calmed that in me. And then over the next couple of weeks, I just found myself like not thinking about food the way that I used to, actually thinking to myself like, oh, I'm super, super hungry. Oh, I'm going to have a banana. Like, and I went, oh, that was weird. Like, I just was making food choices about what my body wanted again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I started to lose some weight again. And it was the damnedest thing because it's like, I always think about it as a balloon, but you've described it as paper towels before, right? Like when you start at a certain weight, right? I was thinking like you blow up a giant balloon.
I like the balloon analogy too.
You start like letting air out of it. Like this really big balloon, like you let a little bit of air out and like the balloon, you're like, oh yeah, maybe it's getting smaller. I don't know. I can't really tell. And there's a kind of a crucial point where it gets to a certain point and then that same amount of air starts to make a difference. And I remember losing 10 pounds and going, my pants are a different size. Like it never occurred to me that like 10 pounds would make that much difference.
Yeah.
And then the next 10 pounds off, I was like, oh my gosh, like all this stuff fits now. Like it was just, it made such a difference. It was such a different piece of the journey. Right. So, so losing 30 pounds in the last about not quite 6 months, like was just this insane difference where 30 pounds before could have been like, I stopped drinking pop and, and maybe took a water pill, right? Like it just was a different thing at my highest weight. Yeah. And so for me, it was just about, well, what's the next piece of the puzzle to kind of see what's possible and get where I can. Yeah. And I also just have absolutely no, no shame or no, consternation about being on a medication to manage a chronic condition. Like that is not part of my makeup. People are just like, well, I don't really want to be on it because, I think I should be able to do it by myself. I'm like, well, I brush my teeth every day. They're not going to get cleaned by themselves either. Like, why wouldn't I take advantage of something that I could? And so I've just seen great rewards from it. And it has not done anything bad in my life either. Like I was really worried I'd have some terrible side effects. I don't know that I could have lived with those, but adding that second piece of the puzzle felt like the natural progression to me. And I'm also not going to not say I'm doing that either. I'm going to be like, yeah, then I decided to go on one of the GLP1s. Someone's that bound. And, and then I wanted to see if that's made my life better or made me feel good too. I started researching that as well. Lots of people, have kind of stepped from one to the other.
Yeah, I think it's becoming much more common in bariatric treatment. But when people first started talking about it like 2 years ago, there was a lot of backlash, even within the bariatric community itself, which was shocking because it's like, you guys all had surgery. Like, what do you not like?
Because humanity's about factions, Kasey. That's what we do. Like, get in our camps and we go, nope. This is the way you do it. This is the truth, right? And it's hard to give that up sometimes.
Yeah. So in terms of the kind of long term, are you someone that says like, yeah, I will be on this for the rest of my life if I need it?
I guess. I think we'll find out, right? Okay. I don't know the answer to that. And I'm okay with not knowing the answer. I I thought, well, I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to see what's going to happen. And then people are like, but you'll never get off of it. I'm like, we don't know any of that. We don't know what will
Yeah.
happen. I don't know what will be available in a year or 2 years, right? I don't know if, they'll be like, oh, you can put a chip in your brain now. You don't think about, chicken nuggets ever. Like we don't know what will
Sign me up
come
for that.
next. Yeah, really. I'd be like, can we get that now?
Yeah.
If there is I don't know the answer. And I'm actually just choosing not to worry too much about it. Now, my bank account's not the biggest fan,
Yeah.
of paying the price for it. But I'm hopeful that just like the surgery and just like these other treatments, that there will come a time when the world says, oh, okay, we got it. These things have a proven record. It is something that, we can invest in. It does improve people's lives and health. And then every great success they have leads to another breakthrough, right? So we'll see what happens next, but I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I'm also very hopeful that we're kind of like at the cusp of this really exciting time in the treatment of obesity. And it seems like it's put the discussion on the radar of the general population for the first time in a long time. I mean, Oprah had a whole special about, treatment of obesity. And I think it's being talked about in ways that it hasn't before. Even just 3 years ago when I had weight loss surgery,
Of course.
people were not having these kinds of conversations. And so I think it's incredible. I mean, I know I've shared my mom has had amazing success on a GLP-1. I think so many people are really benefiting from these drugs. And it's to me, it's like groundbreaking science. I'm thrilled that this is where we are at our time in history. And I think just the best is yet to come, really.
What a time to be alive, right? And
Yeah.
to be in a position to enjoy the world that has these things that are here. And I feel pretty passionate about that too. I feel like we have set gatekeeping some of these things, kind of behind these big paywalls. And I'm fully aware that it is not in reach for everybody, and we have to work on that.
Yeah.
And the more that we can have people showing success, and the more that that we know about the efficacy of these treatments, like the better off it's going to be, right? Because someone's going to want to make money off of it, and they can probably do that better if more people can reach it and invest it.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, Sara, if you had one thing to say to someone who is considering bariatric surgery, what would that be?
Nothing that you're afraid that you will lose along this journey will not be worth what you'll gain. Mm-hmm. There's not a single thing that you're afraid of, whether it's loose skin or losing some hair or not being able to eat all the cheesecake you want, or maybe having a complication. There's nothing that you are likely to lose from this that will not be made up for by the life that you will gain.
Yeah, so true and so powerful. Sara, thank you so much for being here. This has been such a great conversation. I think I could talk to you forever.
Yeah, I'm like, let's just keep talking.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love being able to talk with people about this process, and even more with people that I think so highly of. So thank you, Kasey, for inviting me to talk with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. If you want to find Sara on social media, she is at FatGirlTalking. You can always find the podcast at Former Fat Friend Pod, and I'm at Maintaining Kasey. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.